Thank you everyone for being here. There's a lot of incredible people that have joined, and I'm really delighted. I know some of you, and I don't know a lot of you, which is really exciting. My name is Amber Case. I have been obsessed with humans and technology for a long time. I grew up in a nerd engineering household. My parents were blue-collar engineers who put television on the air as broadcast engineers. My dad also invented weird things, um, like circuit boards and audio devices and synthesizers. And so I grew up also in a smart home that was done on the cheap, and it was uh, it was interesting. Most of the technology would fail, and some of it didn't. And the stuff that didn't fail was really interesting to me. I was really interested in why does some tech stay around for a long time, and why does some tech not? I'm also I went to school to learn cyborg anthropology, which is a subfield of the anthropology of science, which looks at how people interact with technology and how technology affects culture. In 2007, when the iPhone came out, I was one of the first researchers to do work on how the iPhone, especially its flat screen, would affect how we had work and play and all sorts of different things. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about designing calm technology, which is a set of a couple of research papers and very little information other than that I dredged up from Xerox PARC, which was a research institute. Um, these papers were published in the 90s when I was doing my thesis on mobile phones, and I found the papers. I cried because they seemed so universal. They read just like you would read today. They included things like AR and VR and AI, and they read exactly like they are today. And so I started thinking about what would happen if instead of thinking of technology as changing all the time, we could have human universals and technology universals that we could kind of apply to. Um, but first, it's really important to think of humans and animals and species um, as tool using creatures. We've always had things that we've made live alongside us, and that's changed how we have adapted to environments, that's changed the environments that we've been in. And I don't think of technology as something that's new. I just think of it as something that digitally changed very, very quickly. Um, but I like to think of it in a continuum. So I like to think about a tool that was invented or not discovered, but just crafted 1,000 years ago as something that's very similar to today. It's is not really super different. And one of the quotes that I like from the original authors of Calm Technology is that what matters is not the technology itself, but its relationship to us. And I think one of the problems with a lot of tech that's coming out today is that it's focusing on the tech. It's not focusing on the relationship. And when we say, let's make a better relationship with technology, people will often just like put a chatbot in and say, that's a relationship. So I think there are a lot of gotchas around how we design technology and how we can even think about creating it. Um, this is one of my very favorite examples of alongside technology. It's in a very old village that still makes the same kind of ceramics, and it's a water-based tool that grinds up some of the dirt so that you can put it into your ceramic shop. It's very simple. It's a totally water-powered tool. To me, this is incredibly advanced technology. You can see how it works, you can maintain it, and you can work with it over time. So if you want to look more, there's an NHK World special on this. But I really like the idea of here is a craft village where there is a tool that works alongside the village at a village scale. It's not necessarily here's a personal piece of technology. This is supporting a village. And for a very long time, there were lots and lots of water-powered tools that you could see everywhere. And I think remembering how these were made and what they meant is very important. If you want to see more, this is one of my favorite books. It's called Low Tech: Designed by Radical Indigenism by Julia Watson. Julia Watson is coming out with another book soon. It's kind of another book that I cried when I read because I think it's really important to look at how people work alongside their environments, work with local materials, and the rituals and the culture that is involved in weaving a bridge from one side of a place to another, or making very, in my opinion, super advanced technologies, kind of indigenous cybernetics of working with a a set of local materials and a set of climate based situations, understanding those systems for 1,000 years, because in these cultures you often have 1,000 years of memory or the original blockchain that can understand how to make systems that withstand can withstand disturbances like floods, droughts, fires, and be able to understand and predict those systems over time without a bunch of math in some cases lots of math, but being able to do that and have that embedded into the culture so that you're not necessarily having a group of people that publishes a research paper that only a certain amount of people can parse, having it be so advanced that this information can be worked with by 5-year-olds and that grandparents can teach this to their kids. In my opinion, that's incredibly advanced to be able to take that information and put it into a cultural system so that this thing continues to go over time. So this is kind of really an insight in how I think about technology. I think about it at least 1,000 years at a time. I don't necessarily think about it as 10 years at a time, but if I'm looking at a system of social networks or social media, then I'm thinking also of like the original talking drum that allowed for this kind of relayed system that goes back and forth across mountaintops that people were able to put lots and lots of information into. And the act of learning how to make a talking drum with a lot of vocabulary embedded into that talking drum is very important. And what happens when that goes away? So it's a little bit of a preamble here. I also looked this book. It's called Cosmotechnics by Hook Yui. Loosely, this is about that right now, a lot of technology is considered to be um, Silicon Valley based. Tech is almost entirely conflated with Silicon Valley. And what that means is that people think that that's where it comes from and that's how you should build it. Um, Cosmotechnics is about every culture has their own technology and how they create it and what happens with it and how it's serviced and how it's developed over time. And that's really, really important to look at, because how would somebody in a different culture build a website instead of saying, oh, this is how a website works and it's the American way or it's the Silicon Valley way? How does that actually work? Um, so um, So yes, this is the idea behind this book. And I don't think everybody necessarily thinks about that when they think about, the iPhone. What if it were not built by, a graduate of Stanford University? What would it look like if it were made anywhere else? What does that mean? I also like the concept of humans alongside technology, um, or like AI as like alongside intelligence. Um, when the when the camera came out, it was a terrifying moment for a lot of portrait painters. They worried that they would never be able to paint portraits again, and actually portraits are still an industry that thrives because it basically just cheapened the idea of you could have a photo of you and that's fine, but it still takes a lot of talent. The talent resides in the person, not the technology. It's smarter humans, not smarter tech. Um, you have this huge hulking mass of material on the left that you're not seeing when you watch a film. And then on the right, you have someone who's practiced and might inherit those skills through a lot of time in an artist's place, like learning how to wash the paintbrushes, learning how to build the paintbrushes. And so it takes a really, really long time to develop these skills. They're impossible to be perfect at. But again, it's not asking the technology to do anything. The paintbrush is not doing anything. You're deciding what to do with a paintbrush. The camera isn't doing anything. You can point it at something, but it doesn't mean you're going to be able to bring that meaning through the camera. And then the same thing about humans alongside nature. I like this example from the Japanese tea ceremony, the idea of omotenashi. Omotenashi is about having things prepared for someone before they need them and anticipating those needs so that just in time something is there. Now, a lot of times in, I'll just call it Silicon Valley tech culture, there's this idea that automation is a thing and that automation doesn't require any maintenance and that once it's automated, you don't have to deal with it anymore. I mean, tell that to somebody who drives a car. Obviously, a lot of things are automated in the car. It's a metastable system that works really well with road vibrations and all sorts of things. But again, you have to take it to the mechanic and you have to care for it. In omotenashi, when you look at a culture that has a lot of automation already in it, what happens when you apply omotenashi to automation? So this person is unfamiliar with the system because obviously he's not from Japan. He's trying to figure it out. And what happens? A person comes through the wall, understands the system, and can help him with the system. It is not, here's a robot that tells you, sorry, here's a problem, or like, please call tech support. There's a real human there to help. And I think a lot of times when people get stuck, they want a real human because that human can provide the things that a robot cannot, which is that kindness and compassion, or at least helping use the system so you can go through and stop delaying all the trains. And of course, the person is looking at his watch, being like, okay, get out of here. But it is anticipating that some people will not be able to use the system because they're not from the place, they're not familiar. And so having somebody familiar there, helping someone to use the system is a really good way of dealing with something. There was a podcast that I was listening to about a person who was trying to automate the BART systems. And the interviewer came down with him to a BART station and said, have you ever ridden the BART? BART is the local area transit system in San Francisco. And he said, no, I've never ridden the BART. I've only taken taxis. And I said, well, before you automate this system, why don't you try the system? So the guy goes through, gets a ticket, and then goes right up to the woman sitting in the little cubicle to help people and says, I want to automate this and I want to automate you. And she says, that's very cute. And she says, but I get paid like 100K a year. And in my free time, I garden and it's nice. And I'm absolutely necessary to this station. And the person says, oh no, we could just put everything on a mobile phone and you could just have a QR code on your phone or use RFID and then like tap to pay. And right then, just on cue, this family came up from another country and she had to help them buy a ticket from the machine and just sell them a ticket because they didn't have a phone network in this country. They definitely couldn't download the app and set up all of that. So for him, you can automate the things that are familiar to people, but you can't get it all. And when you can't get it all, the best thing to do is to provide people with a soft landing, make the experience of failure wonderful in the case in which this has obviously happened to me when I've been to Japan. It take too long to buy the ticket and someone will help you. But it was such a relief. It was a huge relief. So another example is when we think of from movies, Terminator and RoboCop, is that, you want to have an exoskeleton and wear it and it's insane and it gives you superpowers. But here's an example in Japan again, where somebody is wearing an assistive suit. Look at how this suit just looks like a pair of purple lungs and some nice green color harmony. This person had a slipped disc. It was hard for them to work, but now they can pick up packages better. And somebody else can help them put it on like a backpack and you can see the battery status. And I think that's really important where it's not turning them into a superhuman, it's just assisting them in a way. And it's a pass-through technology because you can actually see what the status is of the tech. And so somebody can help you out if they see your battery is low or swap you a new machine. Everything is very visible. We use so many tools that we're all cyborgs. This is a picture of Steve Mann, who at MIT would attach a bunch of stuff to himself so he could walk around and basically have access to like some of the first live streaming systems that he helped build. He also at this time was putting metallic gel onto his hair so he could conduct a signal through the antenna on his head to MIT's local wireless network, the Athena network. But you don't need to be Terminator or RoboCop to be a cyborg. You might just be one every time you look at a screen. It doesn't need to be embedded into you. And a cyborg actually didn't come from sci-fi. It came from a paper on space travel in 1960, an organism to which exogenous components have been added for the purpose of adapting to new environments, which really means anybody who puts on clothes to go into space, where you're not supposed to go into space at all. What does that actually mean? Um, and so you don't have to be that. Wearing glasses makes you a cyborg, a low-tech cyborg. Having an insulin pump installed in you that pumps insulin when you need to, and that's on 24 hours a day, that's also a more high-tech cyborg, but you don't actually need to be one. Whenever we use tools, we're cyborgs. Um, I have a lot of issues with traditional anthropology. I was trained, and I started studying a lot of the history, and you have all these stories where anthropologists would come into tribes. Tribes knew exactly what they were doing, and they were joking with them and saying all this disinformation. And that got reported back, and we have all of this bad information um, because that's what got really popular. Also, I had trouble with the idea that we would go in and say, from some Western country that there's an anthropological other that's fascinating, what fascinating rituals these people have. And I thought, why aren't we studying ourselves? Why aren't we studying when you wake up next to a phone and it cries and you have to pick it up and soothe it back to sleep? You have to feed it by plugging it into the wall. It's hungry. You might treat it better than yourself. You fall asleep next to it, you wake up next to it, and you have a relationship with it. Why aren't we studying that? Um, and so for me, cyborg anthropology is a really important lens in which to understand how the design of tools and how these have basically like a gas expanded to fill every part of our lives. When we look at how a hammer was designed many, many, many years ago, it hasn't really changed shape. Hammers look pretty much the same. They function pretty much the same as an extension of your fist. Um, but these extension of the mental self is very strange. From cave paintings to cell phones to written word to stage plays, information and the container in which this information is kind of an unstable medium. And so it's always communication and information. But it's interesting to look at the difference between a physical and a digital object, or a physical and a more mental extension of the self. So right now, we live in an era of an over proximity of all things, as Freud would say in his book Civilization and Discontents. He warned of a future in which we would be dealing with a lot of ill-fitting prosthetics. He had an ill-fitted prosthetic, and he was like, oh no, in the future, people are going to have to deal with lots more of these than I am. Oh no. And right now, that era that he predicted is here. So we live in an era of interruptive technology. Not just you trying to watch something on Netflix and your TV player is asking you for an important software update so that somebody doesn't attack your network and take it for ransom, or try to get you to pay some cryptocurrency to lock you out of your hotel room. Or you have battery issues, you have demands on your attention and time. Focus is really, really difficult for people, and we're not really living full moments. So we need the opposite. We need a calm technology. And it's hard to think about what this really is and what it really feels like and what it really means. It is not a yoga mat in a sunlit room with no information happening at all. It's actually the opposite. It's actually having enough information displayed in the right way that you can make better decisions as a person. And it's actually something that's empowering. So at Xerox PARC in the mid-90s, there were a couple of pranksters. I call them pranksters because they had a really good sense of humor. Mark Weiser was in a band called Severe Tire Damage, which actually opened for a very, very big band as the first band to live stream on the web. And John Seeley Brown, I think was he called Chief of Confusion? But they were both thinking about the future in which technology would be cheap. And at that point, attention would be expensive. Attention would be the scarce resource. And they started to write a couple papers. I have these on calmtech.com because they started to get erased from the web. But one of these papers is called The Coming Age of Calm Technology. And it said, the important waves of tech change are those that fundamentally alter the place of tech in our lives. And then the quote that what matters is not technology itself, but its relationship to us. It's just a very plainly written, wonderful, small document, and there's just a couple of these, because it turns out that Mark Weiser got really sick and died before he was able to write a book on calm tech and further his work. And so what won out narratively in the ecosystem of tech was tech that was in your face, tech that talks to you and tries to have a human relationship with you, and tech that is just new tech that's cool for tech's sake. Because Mark Weiser wasn't around to tell that important part of the story for many, many years, there hasn't been that important counter to the overall development of technology, a more stable, long-term understanding of how to develop technology. That's been really upsetting. He died at age 46, I believe, a couple of years before I actually found his work. So I wasn't able to even say hello to him. And I waited for many years for a book on calm tech to come out, not knowing until I read a biography about him a couple years ago, that he was trying to write a book before he died. So I've effectively tried to take on his work in as much of a reasonable way as possible to bring that much needed side of the design discussion into the world. One of my favorite quotes from Mark Weiser that is misinterpreted a lot of the time is this quote. And this is the core, I think, of the misunderstanding around design and technology. He said, a good tool is an invisible tool. And most people just make stuff based on that first sentence without understanding the full sentence. By invisible, we mean that the tool does not intrude on your consciousness. You focus on the task, not the tool. This is the most important thing to remember, is that somehow we've thought that good tools are invisible and tech is going to go behind the scenes into the middle of nowhere and be in everyone's life and control everything from the side, and you won't be able to know what's going on. No, it means that you focus on the task, not the tool. And I think a better wording for this is pass-through. When you use a light switch as a pass-through, you're not focused on the light switch. You're focused on turning the lights on and having light in your room. You can touch it and turn on the light without even looking at it. You can be drunk at 3 a.m, come back to your house, tap the wall, slam the wall if you want, of an unfamiliar hotel room, and there's a light switch somewhere and you can turn it on. You don't need to be familiar except with the concept of a light switch and the idea that there's invisible regulated electricity behind the scenes that's taken care of by a licensed electrician, with a good history and understanding how to make sure that a dangerous thing running through the walls doesn't kill you when you touch the light switch. And I think that's really a good example of calm technology. It is invisible, yes. It doesn't intrude on your consciousness, yes, but it's not actually totally invisible. It's really about getting you to make the choice on whether you want to turn on the lights or not. That you're not opening up the walls and changing that system every 6 months because there's a software update. It's built to last. So I would encourage all of you, if you can, to try to figure out today, if you can, how to see the unseen. What are the things in your life that you use that you don't even notice because they're so mundane? They're just the stuff in your life. Whether that's a light switch or a transom window that allows you to see more light through like an office door without removing privacy, or a window where you focus on the view and not the window, or a car where you focus on the view of the road and not the car, and you can touch most of the systems except for the touchscreen without looking at it, or a chair that supports you calmly without focusing on all the things and protects you from the ground, or a table that calmly has all of your stuff on the table. There are so many things in your life that you're totally used to that are mundane, that are actually super successful mega billion-dollar industries, but we don't notice them anymore. And those, in my opinion, are successful calm technologies. But because we're so good at getting used to them, we can't see them anymore. And because we can't see them anymore, we forget that we can learn really important design understandings from these systems, whether that's a doorknob made of bronze or brass, or a foot pedal in a car or on a sewing machine. Little tiny piece of trivia. When Doug Engelbart designed the first mouse, I think in 1960, there was a foot pedal involved, so you could press with your foot and it would scroll the page for you. Only Twitch streamers have that now, but it's coming back a little bit. Or the foot pedal on the trash can, so it's handless. We have so many more appendages and not just sight, but all these other senses that we can engage. And because we've become so visual and so excited about tech as the thing itself instead of the task, we've forgotten, I think, how to design decent technology. And now as Freud warned, we are filled in this difficult era of too many interruptive stuff going on at all the time. Where's the calm tech in this picture? There's lots of calm tech in this picture. There's a table, there's a rug that provides, I mean, there's a lot of fake stuff in this room. I wouldn't say it's particularly fantastic, but the rug provides something to the human mind that is a variety, a softness, and it ties the room together, but it's an important mental concept of being able to have somebody feel at home. It also does a little bit of the acoustic absorption so that the room isn't super horrible sounding. It's still pretty flat surfaces on here. But the thing that I look at in this room is the window as a piece of successful pass-through technology. You can even lower the curtains and still have light come in and understand what time of day it is because there's a transom window up above. And you don't have to be outside in order to understand what temperature it is outside, or whether somebody's at your door, or whether it's a sunset, or whatever time of day it is. This is an incredible piece of technology, as important as the nail, which was such an incredible piece of technology that it was secret, and people who didn't know how to make the nail when it came out would burn their village down in order to get the nails out, take the nails with them to the next place, and use the nails to rebuild the village in the new place if they needed to move it. So at some point, these technologies were so exciting that a glass goblet would be valued more than a gold goblet. So the idea that we can have glass panes that allow us to see the outside without having to be outside, one, provides a level of abstraction, but also you focus on the outside view and not the window, unless the window is dirty. So this is an incredible example of a calm tech, and it's just there in everyday life. And it's funny how it's so normal, even though it was just an insanely incredible piece of technology when it came out. Just an example of, before and after, adding a transom window in the top completely, is kind of a gradient, a boundary softener that allows you to have more information and more light. And this can be a calming effect if you put it into a house. It completely changes the vibe of the place with just this very simple thing right here. And it's very, very powerful. So when we think about Weiser's quote on invisibility, I like to ask, is a car invisible when you drive it? Yes, I think so. Is a book invisible when you read it? When you're really into the story, don't you not notice the book anymore and you're actually enraptured in the story? Or even a really good film, you're in the film. You're not thinking, I'm sitting in a movie theater for an hour and a half, looking at a screen on which photons are projected from a faraway place, and the Dolby surround sound system is putting information in my ears. No, you're just there and you're thinking about it. So if we look at the history of McLuhan, a car becomes part of us and extends our perception. And how a car is designed allows you specific affordances, and these either work with or against your attention. So a car with a giant blue light touchscreen is working against your attention. But the issue is that design is governance, and so if somebody is trying to make that decision for you, because it's cheaper to produce a car with a giant touchscreen in the middle than actually make physical buttons that you can remember where are and touch without looking, then those decisions are being made for you as a customer, and you can't do anything about it. So pass-through is interesting because it's not that it's easy to use any of these pass-through technologies. Sitting in front of a window, you don't need to do anything. That's obviously a pass-through that you don't need to learn anything about. But it takes a long time to learn how to drive, sometimes a year and a half. It takes many years to learn how to write. You might not ever learn how to really, really write like Hemingway or something your whole life, but you can write enough to communicate. And thinking about pencils and cars, both of these devices are pass-through devices when you use them and have time to get used to them. And so pass-through is use plus time. And after that complexity dissolves, when we get used to it, we have a feeling of a pass-through experience. When we use them, they become familiar, and we just use them. And then we write, and we don't think about it. Then we read, and we don't think about it. We drive a car, we ride a bike, we use a pencil, all of these things that we learn when we're kids Somehow it's okay as a kid to take a long time to learn how to write, to take a long time to learn how to use a fork and knife. Sometimes, sometimes it takes a while if you want to learn how to use chopsticks. Everybody knows it takes a long time to learn these things, and it's okay. Yet the way that we build software, it's not okay to have it take a long time and have it be stable. It's got to be done immediately. So our sense of time, I think, has shifted dramatically from something short term, from something long term to something very short term. I'm really interested. I've been every once in a while I encounter original people from different places, and I'll sometimes go on a walk with a forest and through a forest with them, or um, go and see like some ancestral land that's been in a family's history for hundreds of years, sometimes more. And every single thing has a name and a history and a story. And in many cultures, just looking at a forest, you understand the health of the forest, what's going to happen in the future, just by looking at it. Because the human mind is really interesting. Like there's this idea of sommeliers where you get really good at wine tasting, you all these little we have this high resolution capacity, and yet a lot of people when they look at a forest, they don't see any of that. But we can see all of that. It's totally possible. And the way in which information is displayed in a forest is just as complex as the information displayed in a city. But the difference is sometimes when you're in a city, it's very, very complicated and stresses you out. And when you're in a forest, it makes you more calm. So, what does that mean? It's really about the presentation of information, and what that means, and whether we're attuned to it or not, and whether it's in harmony with our senses or not. Look at all the color harmony in this place. It's really interesting. There's an entire cybernetic system going on here of like growth and decay and recycling and understanding a relation to environment. There's so much information here. So I like to think about this concept of ambient awareness, in which it's not that we need to necessarily be attuned to everything visually, but you can compress information into different senses. And so this is an example of my old co-founder and I built this weather status system. We were watching a lot of videos from like Microsoft and Corning. It was like a day in the life of a software programmer waking up in the morning to a disembodied robotic voice that tells the guy with a perfect American accent, what his schedule would be for the day. It's like nobody actually wants a disembodied voice to read your Google Calendar schedule in the morning in extreme verbosity. What if you could have a sense of ambient awareness, low resolution information in your environment that gives you information without overburdening? And so this was a Hue light bulb attached to a weather service that we just called the API and then stored it in a database and had a cron job so it would gather it. And then also if the power went out or something like that, there would be a backup server so it would still work. But the idea was that it would tell you what the weather was going to be that day with a color. So Portland, Oregon, it was usually very blue, or usually very kind of like gray or white because it was cloudy or rainy. But on this day, it was orange and yellow, and you could make it red if it's going to be really hot. But you get out of bed and you get into the kitchen and you can feel the future with the kind of infosynesthesia. And that's really, really important because if you want the higher resolution information, you can choose as a person to look at the iPad conveniently installed on the wall that will tell you the actual weather report. But you don't have something trying to vie for your attention when you wake up. You can feel it. Just like when you go outside or you look through a window, you can feel what it's like. But this is allowing you to feel the future without having to be there. And it's very simple. But it's a really important concept because I think a lot of people assume that giving people a bunch of information in a highly visual way or an auditory way is going to make them happy, but it's very hard to time that information. What if we just want low resolution information and we want the choice to get the higher resolution information? And not all of the time we actually need the high resolution information, and that's okay. But when we design a system for somebody with crazy verbosity, we interrupt their lives, we interrupt their human time, and we don't allow people to have that human time themselves. This is another cute, this is a cute project. It's just taking temperature, and synesthesia is like having a different um, sense for something else. So it's taking temperature and turning it into color. So you can see what color that temperature is. This is very useful if if you're a plumber, you might label a pipe with a color to tell people if it's a hot pipe or not. And a future plumber might come in and know in which way you've labeled it, so that they don't have to like test the pipe or do all this work. So it's about making something that was formerly invisible visible. And I think there's so much you can do with that. You can also, do it in the auditory way. You can do it in the haptic or touch way. So many opportunities. So the role of Calm Tech is to address the divide between how tech is built right now and how we could build it more relationally. Um, that doesn't mean making an AI that tries to be your friend. It means actual relationship like you and a pencil. So let's look through some principles of calm technology. There were there were maybe like three ideas of calm tech principles. Some of it was a pass through, some of it was using your peripheral attention in these papers. And I tried to make it more robust. And so these are the principles that I developed. So the first one is that technology should require the smallest amount of attention. It's really important. Not every piece of information is worthy of immediately capturing somebody's attention, but it should still be there when needed, and you should be able to have the choice as to whether you want to get it. So we talked about the light switch before. Here's a foot pull that allows you to take your foot, turn it into an affordance. Technology should make use of peripheral attention. Mark Weiser was really, really good at talking about this. But a calm tech will move easily from the periphery of your attention, like over here, to the center, and then back with providing context. It just means glanceability. If you're in a car, you glance up into your rearview mirror and glance back, and you know whether you can turn into another lane. Japan has these tactile paving stations. Not only do they let you know when you're too close to the edge, but if you have a cane and you're blind, you can tap it and understand not to fall into the platform when the train comes by. There's other devices with haptic alerts that can, as you get familiar to them, they can give you information without you having to look at a screen, like the Jawbone app was working on. Technology should function as a pass-through. So eyeglasses are pass-through because you focus on the view and not the glasses. But the glasses are also, they can be really beautiful and elegant and express who you are as a person. So they're both decorative and functional. Technology can inform and support a person in their task without drawing attention to the actions required to do the task. So yeah, there's this little glass frosted window. You can still see if someone's in the room, but you're not intruding on their privacy. This is a really, really important one because a lot of people try to put a human, often a woman's voice, into their tech for some reason. And I think it's really based on the early idea of having an actual full-time paid secretary as not just a flex, but a way for basically a GPT level, an old GPT system that would like take your weird thoughts as an executive and comb through them and like make them palatable to other people and do a lot of that emotional labor to make sure that you had those ties. And then you would, have a spouse that would make the dinner to smooth the business meetings. Like there were all these functions in society which were about care that then people tried to automate with GPT and like robots and like women's voices and like there were all these big issues. And so now you have a Roomba robotic vacuum cleaner on the right that initially when it was built would clean the floors for you, kind of like a filter fish would in a fish tank. But when it was stuck, it would go dun dun. And when it was done, it would go dee 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 dee. As a kind of human universal, like uptone or downtone, anybody could understand that, but it didn't try to speak in a human voice. And also, it would try to find its dock, and if it couldn't, it would kind of be, and then you'd have to help it. And just like a Tamagotchi pocket pet, when we try to help a piece of technology, it makes us more bonded to it. When it does something perfectly, it's scary. When something predicts perfectly what we would like on Amazon, it's terrifying. We like it to just be like a little, like, just a little cute and like a little clumsy. It's adorable, and then we can care for it. And that desire to care is really important. However, the Roomba started to implement a speaking voice, which also means you need to have a larger SD card on the device, and you need to go through, which will be poorly done in many other countries, a voice that needs to be translated in all these different languages. It's absolutely terrible. So the Roomba is one example where they got it right initially, and then they were influenced by whatever idea people have around innovation that needs to speak in a human female voice, put that into the machine. I think a bunch of it is Star Trek. It's Gene Roddenberry's wife's voice in the computer, and she had a great voice. But that doesn't mean that just because we saw it in a film and that's charismatic, that we actually want somebody else's voice in our environment all the time. All the time all the time is the important word. Sometimes, but when necessary. I like the way that this color fill filter changes. Just like a banana, you can tell when it goes brown, it goes bad. Or you can use it for like, banana bread when it gets that stage. But you can see fundamentally the change. And this color fill filter, you don't have to have a Google Calendar attached to when you should change your filter. It just loses color, and you can look at it and say, oh, I can replace it. So it's communicating without taking you out of your task, and it's communicating in a way that's calm. It's so simple. It's nature. You don't need all of this extra stuff to build that. So I really like how elegant that is. Technology should amplify the best of technology and the best of humanity. What is technology good at? What are robots good at? And what are humans good at? And I would argue, Google is a really good pass-through search engine because you're typing in what you want. It's going through a lot of results robotically of what other people have put online, but you are the one making the decision as to what to click on at the end. That's why they removed the I'm feeling lucky button, because most of the time you didn't get lucky. Most of the time when the machine chooses for you, it's not the thing. Humans are good at curators. They're not good at going through 10,000 results and in 0.3 seconds and then displaying them to you in a ranked order. But giving someone, reducing the amount of surface area they need to have to make that choice, and then allowing them to be empowered to make the choice is a really good thing. It supports what technology is good at, what humans are good at, and allows people to have that choice at the end. And we went through the Panasonic wearable exoskeleton as well. This is a difficult one, and I always shout out this PetNet pet feeder because they the idea that technology should work even when it fails is really important to me, because when you look at escalators, when they fail, they just turn into stairs. When you have a phone that loses network connection, a lot of stuff fails. When you have a bridge that has something happen, there's a lot of fail safes in that bridge to make sure that it doesn't just kill everybody. And on an airplane, you can lose an engine or two, and it'll turn into a glider. And all pilots are trained to be a glider pilot first, so that if everything catastrophically goes wrong, there's all sorts of systems to make sure that there's a backup plan and self-regulation. When the smart pet feeder PetNet came out, there had been a previous generation of more analog pet feeders where you could just set a schedule and the pets would be fed at a certain amount, and you need to make sure there was enough kibble in the device. There was also like a kibble chopper to make sure that the kibble, if it got stuck in the hopper, it would chop it. So if you had a cat that you need to leave alone for like 2 days, it wouldn't starve. But PetNet said, we're Wi-Fi connected, we're smart, never worry about feeding and watering your pets again. And what happened is a bunch of people bought these things, and the schedule for feeding was managed by a remote server, and that remote server went down, and the pets starved. If you look at the terms of service on that PetNet site, it said, you agree not to hold PetNet responsible for the well-being of any pet. However, on the box or the website, they said, you don't need to worry about this. So people thought, oh, because it's new, it's good. It's not that because it's new, it's good. It's because it's new. It has the same amount of problems as the old thing. You just don't know which problems yet. And you get to be the beta tester to experience that with your pet. They pivoted and did something else. And at the end, when they shut down the company, they begged people for money and to pay subscriptions to keep it going because they didn't have a good business model. Nobody had been trained as a systems engineer. They didn't understand the backup plan. And when I goaded them about this on Twitter, they said, oh, well, having an offline feeding option was next on our roadmap. as if you could schedule the protection of life as a roadmap. If you raised enough venture capital, you could make something safe. That should have been the first thing. Also, it would have been a lot cheaper if you were to make this system to not rely on a remote server and like an AWS system. And also, you need to have backups. So it was basically not skilled engineers, not engineers at all, people who call themselves engineers without understanding the basic principle of engineering, which is redundancy. When it fails, how does it fail? And does it fail well, or is it a catastrophic failure? There's no regulations in the industry to protect pets. You have to be an electrician to open up a wall, but if you want to make something that handles life and you just put smart on it, people will trust it. And I think that's fundamentally unfair. So I have to give them, I use them as an example a lot, because they could have done better and people should. And it doesn't take too much time to think through how you could do it better. It's actually cheaper to run a company if you think about it. But we're not used to doing that anymore, so we can. Technology should leverage familiar behaviors to introduce new ones. There's a lot of new smart tech out there, and if you go to a VRBO or an Airbnb and the new stuff doesn't look like the old stuff, and you're tired and you're jet lagged and you can't see and you don't know where the light switch is because it's this like new alien system, it's going to be really hard to use. I think that's really, really important to think about. And also that technology takes time to introduce. The iPhone didn't come out all at once. The iPhone had a precedent before of being an iPod that you could basically have a Sony Walkman's worth of songs in, maybe 10 Sony Walkman's worth of songs in, and it was a wearable computer. And then that eventually got the price down on the supply chain to allow it to have a screen, and then GPS chip and a phone and all these things. But it took a really long time to get that process out. It wasn't delivered all at once. And I think when a lot of people say, like, let's deliver something in 6 months, it doesn't allow the time for people to get used to it. I have a silly story about this, that when the elevator first came out, people were afraid of it, obviously. Will I get squished against the bottom of the elevator because I've never been accelerated like this in my life? Or you have to have an elevator operator who's skilled to operate the elevator. It wasn't until the elevator operators went on strike, I think in New York, that people realized they could press the buttons. It's not that technology isn't ready for us. It's usually that people aren't ready for the technology, and we have a digestive rate and speed of a couple of years at a time to introduce any new feature. Technology can create harmony through material choices. So there's someone from MUI here, Robin. Thank you for being here. MUI is a company that adopted the Calm Tech book and work into making a very elegant smart home automation system. It's a piece of wood in which the veneer is so thin, the slice of wood is so thin that you can see the screen beneath it. And so it looks like a piece of wood on your wall, but then you can control your home automation system through it. And it's also blending very old furniture building techniques with high tech. And I think it's really, really a beautiful way of having technology and harmony in nature at the same time. So on the Calm Tech website, there are these principles, and we could share the slides, I think, later. I talked about design as governance. These are some of my favorite technologies. Street lights, like a punctuation for the city. You learn what it means, and then you put it in your system 2 type thinking and just go with it. Even if you're red-green colorblind, you can tell whether the bathroom is occupied or not, because there is a thing that allows you to see something without having to be there. It's taking information from one other place and delivering it to you in another. It's kind of remote sensing. A lot of times when we have tech that makes choices on our behalf, we have this concept of, I have no mouth and I must scream, by, someone's drawing the slides, hello. I fundamentally think the future is outdated. What we think of the future, a lot of it in the West especially comes from Popular Mechanics magazine, and all the science fiction in which we think that everything will talk to us and we'll have spaceships and all this stuff. Science fiction films are very exciting, beautiful blue lights, because blue LEDs became, cheap for the first time. They used to be $40 a blue LED at Radio Shack, and so the color of the future is blue because it's expensive. And the reality is just pass-through interface of Google. It's not so exciting looking. And so we need to divest, if we want to move forward, from are we interested in making this system because we saw it in science fiction, or because we actually want to make something that lives alongside people? Um, and I think also we're in a kind of Victorian era 2.0 where we are stuck with a bunch of ill-fitting prosthetics. This is the Shields green wallpaper that was filled with arsenic that killed people. And I think right now our tech is poisoning our time and it's invisible. Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval came out to prevent objects in Victorian homes from killing people and to have a rating system. Prop 65 was actually about drinking water and toxic information enforcement act, and this allows for people to reformulate their products so that they're better for people. This is a standards body. Underwriter Laboratories make sure that your electronics don't explode when you bring them on an airplane. This is from 1898. This allows kids' art supplies to be okay when they put them in their mouth. So we have standards for electricity, we have standards for all these things, but we don't have them for attention. So I'm going to try to launch this thing called the Calm Tech Institute, which allows you to understand whether something is calm or not, help people understand what it feels like, not what it looks like in an ad, and then the kind of social and health impacts that making things more calm can have in terms of saving people's time and bringing them more back into human time, what the Greeks called kairos time versus kind of mechanical time or chronos time. And yeah, there's a bunch of different sensory and awareness standards, but I'm gonna go through that. This is what it looks like with the scribble on it. Amazing. And so yeah, so we're going to make new standards for having harmonious human and tech interactions that improve our lives. And I've run out of time and I want to get to your questions, so I'm gonna stop here. I do want to give you this website, calmtech.com. It has the original papers that I've been archiving, so you can read some of the early work in this area. And you can also look at some of the later work that I've been doing. There is a book called Calm Technology, which is about the length of a short to medium-sized airplane ride. So if you want to get that, it's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and O'Reilly. And then I'll be launching a new site, calmtech.institute, soon. So thank you so much for being here.
All right. Amber, thanks so much. That was really, really, really fascinating. We are kind of at time, actually. So why don't we do this? If you guys have questions, email me or DM me at josh@bluecadet.com. And I will I'll circle up with Amber and we'll see if we can get those answered. Amber, does that sound okay for you?
Do you have a little bit more time?
I actually have to pop. Actually, you know what? Can I do this? Hey Meryl, can we? Yeah, we can hold on. Everyone can hold on.
If anybody wants to stay around a little bit and ask questions, it's more fun to answer them in real time. And anybody else, if you need to leave, since we're at the hour, definitely leave. But I think it would be really great to
Okay, well,
answer.
let's do it. Let's do it. Okay. All right. I try to keep it tight, but these are all opt in. So let's do it. All right, Meryl, you good? Okay. Can we make Amber the host? Okay, I actually have to kind of roll, but unfortunately, I'm like a sec. But so I'm going to thank everybody, and I will watch the Q&A in the recording. I'll send out the recording to everybody. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm excited to see you guys at a future spaces. And then Amber, why don't you and I circle it back later? But you are the host now. You roll. That was really fantastic. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. All right, great. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to look through the chat history now. And thanks again for everybody being here. Let's see here. Let's see. Cosmotechnics. I heart this idea of different epistemologies of innovation. What can we learn from the logic of other systems of innovation in tech? Yes, great question. Also this Wall Street Journal story this morning. The last stock photographers await their fate under generative AI, which is great. Let's see. Oh, so one of the mentions was making the experience of failure wonderful. Zappos.com, which sold shoes online and still does, back when people were afraid to buy shoes online because they would fail at it, the shoe might not fit. they decided, let's make the experience of failure so good that people will love looking forward to buying shoes online and failing, and we'll make that experience great of sending it back. And that really opened the door to a lot of e-commerce. Someone says that they are a relative of Mark Weiser. I would love to hear from you more, if you have any Mark Weiser memories. There's any other questions? How is your institute looking to share standards and have them adopted? So, good question. Um, and Liza, I don't know if I can unmute you, but if you can ask a question in the chat, it might be good. Apologies. So how's the institute looking to share standards and have them adopted? It really depends on the category. So there are not general standards other than the principles that work for everything. For instance, if you're in a car industry, calm cars are going to be a very specific category that require input from actual car drivers and people that build cars and software engineers, and could take a really long time and are going to be customized to that industry. So if you're in that industry, it becomes really important to work within that category and make it really solid, and then go through a lot of testing. Some of them might not be totally public for some reasons. One is that if somebody, let's say somebody's making a new car company, they pick up the standards online and they don't go through the certification process and get them tested, they might just fake a Calm-Tech seal of approval, and then you are driving a car that says it has Calm-Tech principles, but like the frequency of the lights is incorrect, and there's all these things in your way, and then it could cause human harm. So it's really important to make sure that if somebody's using the Calm-Tech standards, to check if they're using them appropriately and do enough testing. Let's see. Liza, there are three pages of, oh my gosh. I have to see if I can unmute anybody. Oh, let's see. I'm not sure if I can go through the 3 pages and properly find and unmute people if they want to talk, but I'm going to try. It's funny, and if you raise your hand too, there we go. Yeah, if you raise your hand, it's going to be easier for me to find you.
Hi, Amber. Thank you so much for your presentation today. I'm a big fan of your work. I guess so in the last few years, I started out as a tech optimist and then kind of followed a similar trajectory and investigating technology from a historical and then cross-cultural context. And then was doing more research and kind of became a little bit towards a tech pessimist side, but I'm trying to like calm technology brings me back, and like coming to this presentation made me feel like, okay, there's still optimism. But have you thought much about how like in some instances, like following the trajectory of human evolution, like we're devolving, like with myopia or our shrinking attention span, or like those aspects? Well, obviously the attention span you've thought of, but even like our postures and all of that. Like, what are your thoughts on that? I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't like to say things like devolving or like unprogressing or like any of these things, because they assume that time is linear, or that they assume that like human folly doesn't exist. Like looking at the history of like the road system in England, like there's a book by Joe Goldie called Roads to Power, which is like, yay, there were engineers with a great idea for a highway. And then there were a bunch of toll road people and they prevented it from happening. And then people said that they were really good at building highways, but it killed people. And then, so how long it took, like, we had a Library of Alexandria that got burned down. So it's that tension of the real and doing a good job, and then the short-sightedness of the abstraction as we went to digital, and not having people who are really good at understanding a printing press or like where typography comes from, and not having that original place where those things came from means that people can get in really big trouble because they don't have the context. And I think that's one of the issues that I keep seeing, or the idea that venture capital is funded by, small wealthy families, whose incentive is to make a return or have a company go public, not to make a long-term serviceable piece of software for human needs. I think Liza, you are up. Hopefully you can unmute. Yeah.
Hi, Amber. I don't want to take time here. I knew Mark from, I met him when he was 16, and I knew him very well until his death in 1999. He would be thrilled with your work, and if you want to just reach out to me, I'd be more than happy to tell you what I know of him and his work and his family. And he was an amazing goofball and a philosopher. And he would be thrilled that you are taking this work and this idea, which was the core of who he was at Xerox PARC and throughout his life, thinking about how technology can be invisible or ubiquitous. That was the other thing he was known for. So I did not expect this. It was very moving. I'm really touched. So if you want to talk, I put my email in the chat, and I'm happy to touch base if you want to follow up.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. I for many years thought, oh my gosh, what if I'm doing something terrible that Mark wouldn't have liked? But that's no, I think that the sillier I get, the more the more I think it's in line.
His house was also a web of wires, and his family lived amongst all of his ideas, much as you did. So there's a lot of similarities. It's really amazing. I really, really am so glad I got to hear you speak.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Okay, we'll talk again.
We'll talk again. I'll email you immediately.
Okay.
Let's see. Dang Artman says, I'm just starting my journey to get my degree in electronics. Are there any ideas you have for areas to focus my work towards these principles? I would say if you can build weird stuff that embodies the principles of quantum tech that's kind of in the art space, it might force the cool thing about art exhibits, and when you go to see something in the art space, you can trick people into feeling how a different future could be. And sometimes people have to experience it in order to unlock the possibility that a different future exists. It's not just writing a paper about how the future could be different, which is usually into like that past idea of the future that's totally outdated. It's really about actually showing people experientially how something could feel different. And I think that's really, really important to be able to build that and find out. And some of the new exhibits I've been seeing is like, here's a VR headset and here's a bed and you lay down and you experience like somebody else's life. It's like, oh, this is great. Like having some tactility, I think, is really, really important. But I think I'm just going to, mirror what Liza said, is like being more playful with what's possible will show through. And I think that's the end user experience is going to be of joy and like delight. Just like, when some of the original punk bands like played at CBGBs, everybody who saw that experience like made their own band. And that's not entirely how it should have been. Everybody made it in that same shape. I think the important thing is like, how could you make something that's from history, or like how can you get into the depth when you build something versus just what you look at in, Popular Mechanics magazine today or whatever's on the shelf. I really encourage everyone to read some of the original Mark Weiser papers. Computer for the 21st Century is a really good one, and it just talks about the idea of AI and VR and AR, but it talks about it from the perspective of the 90s. Nothing has changed. A democratized experience isn't putting $1,000 overheating headsets on your head and going outside in the climate change hot weather. It's about actually like making good typography for wayfinding in a city with Bauhaus icons from 100 years ago. Let's see, Valerie. Hello.
Hi, Amber. I actually heard a version of this webinar about a year ago in the context of MetaGov, and it's been so nice to see how it's kind of evolved, and mostly with the Com Technology Institute. That's so exciting to hear about. I was, as you presented this project, I was super curious about maybe like the business model you see behind it, or the impact that you're hoping to have with the Comtech Institute. Mostly, one of the things that came to mind for me, and I'm sharing a link in the chat, is whether and how you're coming in conversation with people who are seeking to regulate innovation through a sort of social welfare angle. We have there's this big conversation about the impact of AI on the workplace with, yesterday was May Day. So the way I'm thinking is like really centered on workers and people who encounter more precarious working conditions as a result of like this technology being released without a lot of the considerations that go into Comtech, but also, beyond the tech itself and the interaction, whether it's passed through or not, the societal impact and the sort of like social coalitions that are behind the business, but also the impacts of the business of tech and stuff. So just kind of curious to know more about the Comtech Institute, if you're planning on tackling, like sort of acting as a consultant for people who develop technology, who want to like invest in developing better technology without being incentivized, or working on creating that incentive at a scale by engaging with policy and government, or like just I would love to know a little bit more about what you're envisioning with it. And thank you so much for the great talk.
Sure, thank you. Okay, I'll try to answer this succinctly. Comtech Institute is based on looking at a business model that doesn't require asking billionaires for money so that I have to run a bunch of fancy dinners for them is really important to me. I do not want to be subservient to someone else's idea of whatever fancy thing floats their boat and is innovative and whatever they read in a magazine or whether they're fearful of, and then basically running an org that's very difficult to run, that is more on the governance and human placation side than it is on actually doing the work. So making a standards body is interesting because it has a business model attached of, audit your product to see if it's calm, have a workshop to help your team understand how to implement it in a specific category that is lacking, and then go through the certification process. It doesn't mean that this thing will be big or important or fancy initially. It means that it's doing a good job slowly so that it's longer lasting, more like a glacier carving a U-shaped valley in how tech is made versus a bunch of tiny rivers that run out of water. I want to well it from like a deep aquifer of the past so that it's about doing something long-term and reasonable, so that the brand of Comtech and the idea of getting something Comtech certified, or the idea that you could rely on something as a human, as a consumer, is really important to me, because right now it's really hard to find products that are designed for the long term and make sense. And I think that's a thing that I've followed in one of my favorite standards bodies called EWG, Skin Deep. They rank the ingredients in makeup. And initially, they were just a website. I started following them in 2006 because I love standards bodies for some reason. I think they're really cool. They didn't do much. They just listed chemical ingredients and you got to learn about it. And then eventually they're like, here's some good stuff. And then eventually they made a standard. And now they're pretty big and they're starting to branch out and certify other things. And now there's a fundamental awareness of what's in makeup because of them. They didn't try to do that all at once. Again, I think it's like a digestive process. Like, it takes a really long time and it's okay. And then you start to say, what's in common with all these things? And how do you make standards that are good? And you make them category specific first. So the makeup category is initially didn't seem to be very straightforward, is a lot more straightforward now. because they've identified the basic ingredients and they have enough time for people to reformulate so they can get certified. So there's this push on all sides, from the consumer, from the industry. There's financial incentives for people to do better for their customers. And I want to do the same thing, which involves a long, 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 long process, slow and meaningful versus a flash in the pan. And that's why I'm taking so long to do this. It's a wonderful question, and I hope that answers it. Ooh, I want to say hello to Robin from MUI. Hello, Robin.
Hello, everyone. Amber, it's always great to see you and see these presentations. I think the last one I saw was in Japan when you were with a team in Kyoto, and it's great to see the engagement. It's great to see everybody, here listening and engaging with Comtech, But I think it's just the start. So I'm just here to sort of shill some in-person events because I think it's cool to have these virtual events, but if we can meet in person and play with Comtech products and see you in person, see Amber in person. So MUI Lab and Amber will be in New York next month around May 20th, 21st until a few days after that. And hopefully we're going to organize a Comtech workshop at a Wall Street Journal event. So if people are interested, feel free to reach out to either Amber or myself. We may be organizing follow-up events in June and in Boston. That's also an option, but we really like to see you in person. And I think people in the chat have been saying, should we do workshops, all that stuff. So I think that's something we would love to host. So thanks again, Amber.
Thank you, everybody. I think we may be done with questions. There was one about environment. I think MUI is a really good example of working with the environment and working to make sure that there are people who are, relatives of the people in the super high-tech industry with the 400-year-old furniture techniques, sustainably harvesting wood and having that be part of the new electronics to make really long-term stuff that doesn't need to be thrown away. And I think MUI is the first company, the first calm tech company that I've seen that has taken the principles completely to heart and then integrated them within Japanese tradition and culture. It's incredible. And so it's an honor to be able to work with you guys. I think that's everything. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. Appreciate all of you, and see you around in the future. You can follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'll post more stuff, and then the calmtech.institute website is almost ready. You can sneak peek go there, but it's not entirely there yet. So wait until around May 20th, 22nd for more.